crisis in Texas is accelerating. Millions still without power or water.
What is going on right now is completely unacceptable.
This is unprecedented. They're dealing not only with water, with power, with no heat.
Wait a second. I'm a penguin. Hi there. I know what you're thinking right now. How did Texas get crippled by a snowstorm? Well, I'll tell you how it all went down. Around February of 2021, a major winter storm made its way across America. It was called the North American Winter Storm. But don't let the name confuse you. It was also in South America, particularly Texas. And despite Texas being one of the biggest states in America, they were the least prepared for the snowstorm. For example, several decades ago, the Texas government decided to disconnect their entire power grid from the rest of the country. Why? Because freedom and shit. Plus, there's no need to borrow power from other states. Texas already has so many different energy sources, and there's no way all of them would fail at once. So surely, nothing could go wrong.
Yes.
Bogdanov, take time to yourself.
Unleash the storm.
You see, as the storm made its way across Texas, virtually every power source was damaged since they weren't built for the winter weather. So now, there was a limited power supply. But people kept demanding more since it was so cold. And because the Texas power grid was disconnected, they couldn't borrow from the other states, which means that the people are left without electricity and, more importantly, without freedom. But little did they know just how bad things would really get. Gotta save battery. You see, most Texans actually knew beforehand that a winter storm was coming. But even if they had time to prepare, nothing could save them from what would become the worst power outage in the history of Texas. On the night of February 14th, temperatures became so cold that the power supply could no longer keep up with the demand. The Texas power grid operator had no choice but to cut off electricity for millions of households. This all happened in the middle of the night during some of the coldest weather ever seen in Texas. Most of the homes there have very little insulation, so in some cases, families were living in close to freezing temperatures. Needless to say, people found creative ways to heat their homes. But it doesn't end here, because at the same time, pipes began to freeze and burst. Many homes were flooding, and millions of people had no access to clean drinking water. Oh, and if you're short on food or supplies, you're pretty much screwed since all the stores are empty. People suffered through terrible living conditions for an entire week. In the end, the storm cost around $200 billion in damages. But worst of all was the trauma that countless people faced and the lives that were needlessly lost. But this begs the question, could they have prevented this disaster?
Do not come.
Well, about a decade ago, the same situation happened during the Groundhog Day blizzard, which also caused a major blackout. You would think that they'd winterize their equipment after this, even after the federal government urged them to. But no, they never did. And why would they? It costs a lot of money to upgrade, and there's no incentive. The lawmakers in Texas are also against regulation, so they won't force anything. There's a lot of players involved here. That's why it's almost impossible to pin the blame on a single group, except maybe the Democrats. And I wish I was only joking. The Texas governor claimed that their power outage was solely caused by frozen wind turbines and then blamed the Democrats for it, since they're the ones pushing for green energy. But I still cannot find a single video of a frozen wind turbine in Texas. Even in the news where they explicitly talk about it, they don't give the footage. But anyways, what are other Texas politicians up to? Well, Ted Cruz was seen boarding a plane to Cancun, literally as his people were freezing from the snowstorm. He claimed that he intended to work remotely, but we all know that he was remotely working. Ted Cruz later realized his mistake and came back the next day. At least he didn't call his people lazy and weak like this Texan mayor did. But after the snowstorm had ended, the Texas government knew that they had to make changes and passed a bunch of new laws. But at this point, the damage had already been done. They could only make changes and pray that this terrible situation wouldn't happen again. But literally as I was working on this video, another winter storm hit Texas. It wasn't as bad as the previous one, but there were still blackouts. It's gonna be a while until Texas fully adjusts. But I think it's safe to say that the worst has already passed. And as for me, well, I am going to avenge my family. I know who the real culprit is. I will look for you. I will find you. And I will kill you. In a video game, of course.